Hello, everybody. Welcome to our RED program translation video. In this opportunity, we're going to be working with the material of RED program number 142, which corresponds to Vuelta 15 or lap 15, aparato 507, year asume 2025. This program was recorded on August 13th of 2025. So we will begin now. I'm going to share the screen of the text. This is easier for me. I have prepared it so that I can go translating it for you guys. So Ale begins saying that we have been waiting a long time for this moment. A moment that for the first time, lap 15 has this crunch. One second. So she's saying that this lap 13 has this specific crunch because we always route each lap or each vuelta in calendaria with an update. And lap 15 implies lap 4 of everything that has to do with the other. But of course, lap 4 for the third cardinality is the lap of the destiny or destination. So when we all get updated, our destiny our destiny changes. And this is an argument that this is an something that arguments the logical hinge. Remember logical hinge or bisagra lógica 15? The logical hinge of lap 15. She also says that this has never been so eloquent as it is being now that we are routing calendaria along with the table of elements. And we didn't know how spectacularly it converged with calendaria. And calendaria is something that is here since 2017. And we are now in 2025. So it is very impressive because it seems as if all of the variables had been very much prepared from the start. The thing is that now, whatever has already occurred will be what will determine what is to come. So what is it that is coming? The cascade of what is already predetermined. The only thing that is missing is that we, as the last link, figure out where we stand after all of this. But that is like the last step. So something that we have been working with and elaborating and adjusting is these 32 columns multiplied by 11, right? In the table, 32 columns multiplied by 11 lines. That's where we get 352. That's why Alice speaks of predetermination, right? It is great. It is immense, this convergence. And all of this movement between 224 and 352, between those two spaces, we have 128 spaces. And 128 divided by 16 gives us 8 laps. So we have a remaining of 8 laps that separates us from lap 22, which is the new Toganeson, which will be controlling the Oganeson, right? The Oganeson, which is 118, will now completely be managed by the solar code, not by the cosmic scale, right? The cosmic scale would be now becoming part of our past. And what is now arriving is the galactic scale, concretely the galactic scale. So I thought this was one of like the best things she said in the program. The cosmic scale would be in our past now, and what would be arriving is the galactic scale, concretely. So what does this mean in LGC? It means that Sol has to be paired in parity with the rest of the stars, where one star cannot crack the code of another star, right? It is about the fact that we if we are accepting a materialization, we will now have to do it with a species of like a visa, like a permit. But it is not like it was before, where it was like, okay, I'm gonna project myself from nothingness to whatever planet, I don't care which planet, right? Not anymore. Now it has to go through that stellar origin and determine which are the variables of that entorno that have to be taken care of, right? The variables of that entorno that have to be taken care of need to become part of the framework contract. So this is what we will now be experimenting. Another thing is that the 13th of August is the native date of Alcides Carrion. We know Alcides Carrion has been present in all of the development. And something really important about Alcides Carrion is that whatever he did, it wasn't his intention that failed. What actually failed was the program in the solar code to implement that intention. Okay, so it wasn't Alcides Carrion's intention what failed. Sorry, there is a big storm. What failed was the program in the solar code to implement that intention. Okay, so it was about the lack of quality of the solar code, or the young stars situation. But his intention, the intention he had to be able to go through and follow with the process that initiated when he injected himself with the virus, and because he wanted to find the causes, right? That is not what failed. That is not like a failed attempt. What failed is the solar code that supported it, because he passed away on the 39th day of having injected himself. And he passes away that 39th day uh, converges with the 5th of October, right? So this is not a coincidence, of course. And LGC, we know that the global quarantine begins the 14th of October. And we know that from the 5th of October and the 14th of October is that void, that window that we have between, in that shift between the Gregorian and the Julian calendar. But now that we can see this from the perspective of the solar code, why are those 10 days missing? Now Alejandra says that she says it with more propriety. She says that those 10 squares, those 10 missing spaces, are very important to manage apparatus 396, which refers to the mental codification of the context. The Asume year of apparatus 396 is 1581. That's the Asume year of apparatus 396. And there we can see the mind of the context, right? Now, mind, that's where we have the mind in the context. But when we have the mind in the external source and base 21, that's where we have 1582, which is the Asimila year of apparatus 396. Another thing that we have on the day this program was recorded is Google Day, the Google Day, which reads 5882. So Alejandra says that is the design of chaos and control. Every time that we see an 88, Alejandra mentions chaos and control, right? In this case, we have 5882. So Ale says, this is the design of chaos and control that the circuit will have, that will be administrated by the fifth dimension. That circuit will be administrated by the fifth dimension. So this is what would be decoding at the present moment, where the program was being recorded. So the grade or the level of precision is really very impressive. Another thing we have is the wheat metric. We also see here 258 inside of 57, right? And what did we just finish codifying the last 4 days of lap 13, day 224? Hold on one second. Yeah. So when we finished codifying day 224, 2020, 221, 222, 223, and 224. When we finish 224, that is what codifies LA. And we know that LA is the interpreter, right? Well, now this is put into execution. 258 is the link that will be covering the circuit, that will be providing coverage to the circuit that we need to keep ourselves alive here in the third dimension. And the fifth dimension would be for us, the architect, which is the one that creates the framework contracts. And the octave is the digital origin that the container will be reading to provide us with the fourth cardinality in the flow of signals. So this means that it has to do with synchronicity in its most pure state. We have been progressing year after year in the construction of the concepts, very slowly. But when everything goes into execution, everything happens simultaneously. So everything that we have seen, little by little, fraction by fraction, is all put into execution all together. And it's an execution that can be really elegant, and we might not have any kind of conflict in the execution of all of this, or it can be the other way around. It can be not very elegant. But this will all be depending on how much each one of us was in our own re-axis. The one that was very much in his or her re-axis, connected all the time, this transition or this process or this execution will be very elegant. But for the lovers of manipulation, they will not be having such a great time because they will be depending on an external reaction, a reaction that is not their own. And clearly, that is not something that will be arriving. So now Alejandra shows how the periodic table, the routing of the periodic table will be, how will we be working with this along with calendaria, right? Second, I'm gonna open also so here we have the periodic table. And now what we will be going through is from the beginning of lab 15, we will be going through one column sorry, there's a lot of noise. Hold on 1 second. So we can see here that every quadrant, since it has 4 spaces, beginning from lab 15, we're going to be going through lines -2, -1, 7, and 9, right? So on the first quadrant of lab 15, second quadrant, third, and fourth, we're going to be going through column 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So here we have it, right here. The first time I saw this, I was very much impressed. It is amazing. It is amazing, all of this. I can't quite explain it with words, but it just makes sense, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this. Okay, so next thing, continue with the translation. So Alice says, what this configuration will require now is that this connotation 7 and 9, we can see here, 7 and 9, right? Is supported by the author, right? So every time this situation will be pointing to the author because the author because the actor will lose script, like will run out of its script, like it doesn't have any more script. So the author has to come out to the court and become an online author in real time because the author is obligated over here. The author is obligated to be the actor. So the superposition of the author and the author and the actor, this superposition will not be allowing a delay between author and actor because -1 and -2 are arriving from antimatter and they arrive upon the actor, right? So anything that is not sustained by uh, each person's own re-axis will fall. Everything that is not supported by each person's re-axis will fall. So what happens with line 8? Line 8 will have our own native Francio, 87, right? And that is what is going to be guaranteeing that this change becomes accessible. Let's remember that in the normal table, this function of Francio was placed in lab 7. But what we are doing is an analysis from the logic of the subatomic scale, not from the logic of the people in the anatomic destination or destiny. So that is why we have to anticipate the risks, give them treatment, because when we do that, what we have left are the opportunities. So the opportunities from 7N, the opportunities arrive to 7 and 9 simultaneously because we change the native 1 and 2 for the -1 and -2 that are not native, but that are native of right now. So Alejandra says we are kind of like updating that's native 1 and 2 through the not native -1 and -2 that are arriving from antimatter, but the -1 and -2 are always native to the now. Yeah. Okay, so here we are with lab 15. And in the beginning of lab 15, we have the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 17th of August, which are the spaces that belong to line -2 and -1. And then 7 and 9. So beginning from lab 15, each cardinality will be responding to a column of the table. Why? Because we are all going to be updating simultaneously. So in this moment, in the beginning of lab 15, the first 4 days, the input is taken first by the body, then we have a mental impact, then we have a consciousness situation, and then in the entorno or in the context, right? Then we go into lab 16 again, and then we do that again. Physical, mental, consciousness, and then the context. And then 17, and so on and so forth until we reach lab 22. So this is what's going to be happening from now on, starting from lab 15 all the way through lab 22. Then when we get to have everything managed and administrated, we go into what the Ring of Fire is, right? That we know that the Ring of Fire, this Ring of Fire in this year, composes the first of the 4 clocks of apparatus 507. This way, the first year that we are applying all of this to the maximum level is like it is right now, 2025. So what we will be doing is we're going to be observing, we're going to be learning, we're going to be experiencing. Because now we have no other choice than to add the word experiencing. Alejandra, remember, she never used the word to experience. Because before lap 15, we come from spending a few laps where everything's all in black, right? All in black, all in black. That's because there is a lot of elaboration in the antimatter. This is what is telling us that we need to update, right? Which is those black spaces would be the base of the updates or the door to Marvel. The doors to what is all these marvels, right? Um, and then Alice says, I would say that we're going to be discovering what our own defect is. But she's not talking about the defect in the final phase of it, where it has to do with the behavior. No, she's talking about the scale of the processor of signals, which is how I am able to receive signals and how I can go from the reception of signals all the way to elaborating an answer. So, elaborating an answer does not imply using the reactive, right? Yes, the reactive will come out because it is as if the anchor will be using a format in the present to be able to express that reactive. But managing like the flow of signals and then using the processor for that all the way through until I can manage the response, that is different. So, the idea with all of this is that we are able to pull the signal, right? Pull the signals, restructure right there online. We are feeding the interpreter. We are building very serenely, very calmly. We are building the interpretation very calmly. But this doesn't happen when we use the memory instead of the antenna. Okay? Now, everything that was internal has already happened. Now we're gonna see the cascade of consequences of everybody being updated and simultaneously. So this is a masterwork of the subatomic scale. It is an amazing masterpiece. This is a continuous education. It is a scalar education that has been updated, and we are now on year 13. So she corrects here that in the last red program, she said that this was year 12, but it's actually year 13. So year 13, of course, is very important because it makes us turn to look to those last 13 spaces of the year. 1 year for each position of the clock. Understanding that 353 is the key, right? Is the processor because it is the one that's going to be synchronizing the three temporal velocities. Okay, so that is what the processor is. If I am able to have something in the flow of signals, I am able to reprogram the intermediate scale, and of course, I am able to reprogram the final scale as well. But if I am not with the antenna, evidently I'm going to be late for that. And the only thing that I have remaining is the programmed behavior. But the thing is that the good part of all of this is that the entorno itself is the one that is not going to be allowing um, to be stagnant, to not move, to just stay and do nothing and not change and not update. That the entorno is not going to be allowing any of that. So she says, as I see things, everything is very fluid. It's flowing very well, and evolution is going to be uh, very much accentuated, right? And she's talking about this in generic terms from now until the end of the year. Because in the end of this year, we have the shift between solar day 739. You know, we've been working with 739, so going through solar days that begin with 739. So the last day of that is the 12th of December, which is solar day 739599. And the 13th of December, we have 739600, right? So here she says that we're going to have on the solar day the frequency of apparatus 396, which is the one that interacts between Julian and Gregorian. So we're gonna have that frequency in the last days of this year and the first days of the beginning of the next year. Therefore, the frequency that is going to be kind of like integrated now is the frequency of the memory. But please, she says, when I say memory, please understand it well. It is the memory that the third dimension needs to be able to develop itself, right? So apparatus 396, that's solar code. Years 1581, 1582, 1583, and 1584. 58 is the mental regulation in the context, in the circuit, in the perception, and in the destiny. Meaning that this is the configuration that we need to put into play the third dimension in an aesthetic form. But that frequency, we're now going to know that frequency in a very dynamic way because you know that 96 and 39 and sorry, 96 and 69 are dinámico y estático, right? Dynamic and static in Spanish. So she says that now we are going to be knowing that frequency in a very dynamic way. Because by the end of this year and the beginning of the next year, we have this frequency very much installed in the solar day. So clearly, nothing will be stored. Everything needs to be like running like with an active license, so to say. The license needs to be active, like paid. You can't have a free trial anymore, and you can't have like a backup or like a storage with which you function. No, everything needs to be running. And if it's not supported that way, then it will not be supported because there will be no place to store anything anymore. So the third dimension is something that is structured or created by a consciousness of another level. Well, that consciousness of another level is not it's not knocking on the door and it's asking, "Where's the author? Where's the author? Where's the author? Let's go with the author." Because the actor ran out of scripts. So we need the author. But this is not something dialectic. This is frequential. This will be mandatory, frequentially speaking. Symbolically, everybody's going to be living it. But to sequence all of this, technically, that is a luxury. And it's a luxury that is going to take us to another level, which is to maintain and create the third dimension. Because we have to know that the solar code depends on our evolution in the particular scale. Let me say that again. The solar code depends on our evolution on a particular scale. We're going to be having an anatomic destiny, and we're going to be having an entorno, and we're going to be in charge of it. So we have the entorno for the collective administration, and we have the human person for the particular administration. This is immense. So we have no more time for recesses, and it all becomes very interesting. Another thing that Ale talks about is that event 72 happened the 9th, 10th, and 11th of August of 2025. It was great. And she said that they were able to work a lot with the table of elements and that they were able to explain very, very deeply the connection between Gregorian calendar and the solar code. Also, they worked with the mechanism of the leap seconds, which is why all of this becomes frequential and not symbolic. Because before we had the golden standard as a backup, right? This situation with the human interactions, because what is economy? It is the interaction between all of us. One person offers a product or a service, and the other one consumes that product or service. So, if we are able to read each other properly, that pattern 79 author actor, because autor, the word autor in Spanish, which is author, adds up to 79. If we're able to read ourselves properly, each other, this author is going to be interlinking all the time, is going to be interlinking the contents in the container, and the contents are going to be doing these scalar progressions, but in a balanced and with equilibrium. Okay. Now, if this pattern is corrupted, as we have seen since 1971, of course, we have seen that economy is deregulated. And of course, clearly, because what happens is that that structure has very symbolic components, that gold standard structure. She says that it's too symbolic. Well, now it's not symbolic, it is frequential. And we have to say also that it doesn't matter who wants to put or remove the gold standard, because that is not the point anymore. Like, it doesn't, things don't go through that place. It has to do with the configuration of the subatomic scale. Okay, whatever we had prior to that were mechanisms that were old, like ancient mechanisms that were used before the apparatus 500 was activated. So now, with apparatus 500 activated, we have seen that Calendaria came out in 2017, and that the leap seconds stopped in 2016. But we didn't realize this until a lot later. We realized all of this in 2020. But the stopping of the leap seconds had already happened when we realized it. Okay, so what we're doing now is we are reading what has occurred. So the thing is that LGC will always be doing these scalar progressions in the most elegant way possible. So now we're going to be observing how all of it happens. Um, in the moment, what Alejandra can say, she says that she's very happy with everything that has occurred and to have encountered so many people that she had already met before, and that these people were able to sense the evolution of the development, the evolution of her, the evolution of the team that supports the infrastructure of the event. And that really there are so many things where the metric is really important, because if there is no metric, there is no improvement possible. So she's also saying that as soon as they have organized everything that has occurred, they're going to present the inscription for the next year events, which is the events for the Asemila year, which will also be in Argentina, also in June and August, and also with the premise that they have to be people that have gone to physical events between 2013 and 2020. So this is maintained all the way through the 4 years of apparatus 507, because it is very critical and very important to have your own registrations of the evolution of the development, of the evolution, as well as the evolution of the person that brings the development, which is Ale, and the evolution of the infrastructure of the event. So all of these things are hand in hand. Nevertheless, she also explains that we have these four people that Alejandra presented, um, that they get that anybody who needs somebody to accompany them with the development, they are going to be there, right? Um, so in the measure that this development moves forward and it puts into evidence many things of the structure, um, all of these things become knowledge appropriate for the third dimension. So these are going to be things that we're going to be able to learn. Linearly, all of these things are going to be data that is showed, and these data are going to be supported by the logic, right? That this is all of this data is already provided. So this history that we share provides the metrics that support the development. So when the development reaches that level, it becomes knowledge, just as how the word knowledge is interpreted in the third dimension, which is something relative to the past with a fourth cardinality that has already occurred. So there comes a point of LGC that it becomes knowledge in the third dimension. But when we are talking about the fifth dimension, there is no occurred fourth cardinality. Therefore, in the fifth dimension, we have cone and we have foundation, which is I am going to be receiving or I'm not going to be receiving. I can get a formation in other logics that are parallel and independent to the third dimension, or I can choose not to. Can be because I'm not interested or because I can't find the meaning in it or whatever. It's going to be according to every case, but definitely what Alejandra wants to note is that the knowledge for a logic that is not from the third dimension is something that is different. So the knowledge for a logic that is not of a third dimension is something different, right? Something that is not the third dimension because it has the task of creating the third dimension. It has to provide all the things that the third dimension is going to need. So the thing is that a lot of people interpret that the totality of evolution has to do with experiences. That is not the case. A fraction of evolution has to do with experiences, yes, but not everything. So we should be able to detect which is the fraction of evolution that does not have to do with experience, which is the part that has to do with the flow of signals. And there we are talking about something else because that is like um the something prior, right? When we are talking about the flow of signals, we're talking about something prior to the experience. What is prior to the experience, which would be time zero for the third dimension. Another thing that came out a lot of the event that Alejandra shared in this program is that it is very, very, very important that we give a lot of value and a lot of sense and meaning to our own reach and scope that does exist. Our own scope that does exist, that is the most important thing. Because for any mechanism, any scalar mechanism to shoot itself, like to turn on, it requires all of the occurred events to be accepted. For the scalar growth to turn on or to kickstart, it requires that all of the occurred events are accepted. If all of the occurred events are not accepted, the scalar march doesn't even begin. So everything that has occurred needs to be accepted previously. Full peace with the past is a total requirement. It's something that is not negotiable. Um, because the logic that we have to apply there is not a human logic. And if I cannot separate myself from the human logic, then my consciousness is of a third dimension. My appetite is of the third dimension, and my conception of time is that it runs from back to front, and that's okay. There's no problem there because that is a valid scale of the structure. The only thing that we want to say is that it is not the only scale of the structure, but it is a valid scale. And that valid scale is the reason why Alejandra, cloned line 7 to line 8 to provide legality and not just legitimacy. Yes. So Alice says that when she was young and she was with the Tao, she went to Taiwan in 1998. And they said that the eighth level was the karma seed. In the eighth level, we could find the seed of the karma. Well, clearly, we are in a conception that is not symbolic of what that eighth level is, because that is where we're going to find the gravitational octave. Because if we do that, if we left the gravitational octave in the seventh scale, that's because there is an active manipulation. Now, in lap 8, that's where it has to be because we are legalizing the gravitational octave. We have to legalize everything that has occurred so that everything that has occurred can be used, can be capitalized. Because before it had a legitimate order, but it did not have a legal order. That was missing in the code. So now having a legal platform and being able to work without friction, then all of this is going to be able to be developed without friction. So if we don't have friction, what is it that I am expecting? She says that the lupa or the magnifying glass is more amicable and that we are able to stop using culpa, which is blame. Remember, lupa, culpa, magnifying glass, and blame. Because blame we used to use blame as a connector to the NO cardinality. And she relates that with the situation of the legalization of the native octave. If the native octave has whatever scope it has, okay, it has whatever scope it has, and that is not wrong. It has the scope it has. That's the end. So to legalize the octave, the native octave, it's something that's very important so that the NO cardinality, instead of linking us through blame, because we're very accustomed to blame, as much as our own blame and as well as blaming others, right? Because anything that is stored in memory and that it is uncomfortable, I am going to try to exhale it as blame in the form of blame. And it's going to take any form, any direction, and the pressure because it wants to release the pressure of my central nervous system because it's trying to regulate a variable. But if we legalize the gravitational octave, there is calmness, even when I am observing that scope, because I can place magnifying glasses, focus, because there the consciousness will work, and when the consciousness is working, it will create a mind. The mind I create the mind with all of these reasonings, right? And then I sleep, I wake up, I sleep, I wake up. All of these things come into the body and my scope is expanded. So all of this mechanism is going to be executing, right? So this situation with the legalizing the gravitational octave, she says that it will be frequentially very important because the same way that the body has a space, it also has a limit because the space is provided by Ri, but the limit is provided in Ro. So we cannot fool around very too much. If we don't have a scope, then a function cannot be executed. A public function cannot be executed. Yes, private, not public. But she says, I'm not gonna develop that too much. I'm gonna wait for reality to show us that way. But as much as people do not understand the technical part too much, they will observe all of this in execution directly in an integrated way in any theme, in any situation, in any topic. Because it is an amazing constellation of variables that are convergent. And it is beautiful to have routed every single thing separately and then observing it all together being executed in this very critical moment in the apparatus. Because what is it that we are assuming? We are assuming the structure that is keeping us alive. We are assuming a role of the author. So, but we have to be very careful because it has to do with the reach that each person can commit to that, okay? Because every scope is different. So it is very important that we completely and fully respect our own reach. And of course, respecting someone else's, other people's reaches, because other people's reaches are going to play a very important role in the interaction. So when I can sense the reach that is not my own, I can create better quality in my relationships. Maybe not quantity, but yes, quality. Because when I can put the observer, when I am using the observer, the quantity diminishes and the specific frequency becomes more rich, right? So every time that we put into play the observer in these topics, what's gonna happen is that the Earth is gonna slow down, and it's translation. It's gonna slow down, right? So another thing she says is that this year Alejandra turns 55, right? She's a native from 1969. The thing is that next year, the ones that are native from 1970 are going to be 55. and then and so on and so forth. But she's saying the natives of the 4 years relative to apparatus 493 are going to turn 55 in this apparatus. For apparatus 493 is the initiator of what for Sol is the paradox. To be able to have a design to update the perception, right? So touching these 55, 56, 57, and 58 years, that paradox is going to be developed, of course, with the quality that the solar code allows. So what it is allowing us is to be much more attentive to the opportunities. We are also very much aware of risks or to this situation. Um, we are very much aware of risks thanks to these early alerts that we have been having, right? Because if we didn't have these early alerts, our destiny would probably be very different at the moment. Because to influence the flow of signals, when we have access to the flow of signals, or we're managing the flow of signals, the decisions that are taken with much better and improved criteria. We could say that we are the owners of the reins of the octave. So the responsibility, when we talk about responsibility, it is something that has already happened inside all of us, right? And now it is simply realizing that this is now put into the public field and realizing where each one of us stand in all of this, in this whole execution, because it is the context, the one that is going to provide us its own version of where we are included in it, where we are included. And where we are included, that's where we have our scope, that's where we have our reach, and that is also where we don't have our reach. So another thing, the anatomic scale in the body, the more regulations it has, the better it functions. So Ale says, it is really noticeable. All of this is really noticeable, and we are going to be experiencing all of this quite a lot. So there we go. This is a 1 hour program. It's not very long, but I think it was very interesting what Alejandra shared in the relationship between the periodic table and calendaria. And how we're going to be transiting from labs 15 to lab 22, and then the Ring of Fire, of course. So it is very interesting. I was really not expecting that. I thought that it was all going to be, how it was when we established it or when we funded it. Remember that to establish something is very different than when we see it functioning. So this is the first year when we are observing this functioning for the first time. The first year of apparatus 507, apparatus of arreglario or the fixer. So this really, for me personally, provides a lot of excitement to see how things unfold. I get a little bit restless as well because sometimes I see so much chaos out there, and I really just have to retract to the NO cardinality to just observe and neutralize everything, because if not, but imagine how hard it is for people that are not able to do that, that are not able to use their processor dynamically and to use all 4 quadrants of the structure to deal with existence and manage my existence. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to just be in the 4th cardinality and not be able to neutralize anything and just have a completely partial perception of things all the time. That would be absolute torture. Absolute torture. So we're very lucky to and privileged to have been part of this whole process and to have been able to observe this whole situation from the beginning, like the development and step by step, little by little, and then observing how all of this is being put into execution by the solar code. It is truly amazing. So I hope you guys enjoy this material, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.